I was actually listening to this Glenn Beck podcast, and he was interviewing a Pastor Jonathan. I don't remember his last name, but he was talking about the three spirits of this world that always pervert cultures, and they're biblical. So Baal, Ishtar, and Moloch, and how Baal's role is to strip God out of society. And Pastor Jonathan talked about how we saw that in, I believe it was the 50s, when they took prayer and Bible out of schools, and then Ishtar's role is to bring sexual perversion in and all these other things. So we saw that with the sexual revolution of the 60s, where,
and even beyond, way far back. Yeah.
So it's almost cyclical. And then Moloch is child sacrifice. Like he attacks children. So what do we have? Roe v. Wade coming in the 70s. And then, of course, we see what the ramifications are of those. I talk about all the time how the African American community was like 73% father and mother together. And then, we get this public assistance or public welfare thing that happens. And now it's like 21% of African American households have both a mother and a father in it. And we see the degradation of society. We see what's happening in Chicago. We see what's happening in Atlanta and Baltimore, where I grew up, where you have these kids that are growing up without fathers. You have these kids growing up without, both parents in the household, and they don't have a hope for the future. And that's twisted and perverse. So I can see it, and I'm glad you're bringing that up, because we do see that. We see the attacks on the family. We see the attacks on what God says, because God says that we are loved. God says that we are his children. God says that we are perfect beings.
Which brings us back to your original question, that the more you dive into his word and realize the difference between who he actually is versus the twist that the world has, I guess, propagandized God. But then also, what is it that God actually says? And reading it in his word makes us see just how vulnerable we are to the deceptions. Like, when I'm aware that my thought is, I'm not good enough, and I know what God says about he will provide, and he's sufficient, and his word is sufficient, and I'm here to serve him and his purposes, then I have that choice of, am I going to, kind of ruminate and nurture those thoughts and feelings that I have apart from God, or am I going to believe what God says and obey what he says, even if it's a little different than how I'm feeling, right? And for people that don't know his word, what are they using to pull the filters off of their eyes, or the scales off of their eyes? And they don't have that truth to even know, because it's a different experience if you're having a down day and you're really in touch with these lies that you're believing about yourself, and yet you know them to be lies. Correct. You just have a hard time convincing yourself of the truth. That's a different experience than not knowing those are lies, right? And this idea of relativism, where there's no absolute truth, everybody just gets to believe whatever they want, and somehow that
insanity
that is a thing, is a big part of what, like, we're all indoctrinated with that thought, even if with that way of thinking, even if we don't realize it completely, because that's kind of the struggle of, if I believe this, it must be true, right? Even though I know God's word says this is true, I'm believing this and it's true. Instead of, if we weren't indoctrinated with relativism, we would surrender our deceptions much more easily, because we would know that this absolute truth is absolute.
Absolutely. And I think that's why in God's word, he says to test the word.
Yeah.
God doesn't want us to just blindly follow him. He wants us to prove him at his word, right?
If he wanted us to blindly follow him, he wouldn't have given us free will. We wouldn't have gotten ourselves into this mess to begin with.
That's right. Yeah. So I'm encouraged then that we always have that source to come back to. And I'm encouraged by the notion that there does seem to be a groundswell of people that are trying to get back to the root and the heart of what God designed.
Yeah, that is very encouraging.
Even younger people, right? Mm-hmm. You see
they're hungry. Like they I think that you can only eat junk food for so long before you're like, yeah, give me that plate of vegetables. Exactly. I need it. Exactly. I want something real and healthy.
Yeah. Because you said it best. Even if you change who you are on the outside, you can't run away from you. I think that's a great line.
And I think righteously angry, but let God convict me if that's not quite it, at people's lies when they're speaking to the youth and convincing them differently. Because you can't get to the third decade or the fourth decade in your life and not realize that whatever it is you sought after so hardcore isn't empty when you get there. Right. So we call it the elusive horizon of happiness. We think, as long as I, get a good date to the prom, then I'll be happy. Or as long as I get a good grade on that test, then I'll be happy. As long as I get into a good school, then I'll be happy. A good job, marriage, whatever. Cut and paste any social marker of success. And when we're honest with ourselves, we realize, well, those things were nice and, they were enjoyable, but there was not a then we're happy ever after. There's always something else to chase after, right? And someone, I don't even know to give them credit, sorry, but had pointed out that, they were trying so hard to get into either Yale or Harvard. And they had said no to so many things in high school just to stay focused on this goal. And they got to where they were and they were so happy for a little while. But they looked around and saw everybody walking by was just as miserable or happy or distracted as they were in high school. It's not that you get to this goal and you then are, forever. And so it stands to reason that if you're unhappy about something and you then make a physical change, whether permanent or temporary, that too is not going to bring anything other than momentary happiness, which might really just be distraction. And so I don't understand why adults would be telling kids anything different. Like we want kids to benefit from our knowledge and whether we've learned it the easy way or the hard way, it's natural. It's good to want to pass that on. And so I wonder for the adults who are passing on something more damaging, where does that come from? Right?
Probably selfishness.
Yeah.
Like you said before.
And how deceived they must be, though, to think this way themselves and then to be so sure that they're going to pass that on and it doesn't match reality.
It may go back to the whole idea of misery loving company, right? Like I think of somebody that may be teaching kids the wrong thing. They are so miserable in their life, and this is my assumption, they're probably so miserable in their life that they want more people to be miserable as well. Just like when we're in a good place, the thing you want to do is share the good news, right? So I think we do both of those things. When we're in a bad place, we want other people to be in that bad place as well. And when we're in a good place, we want that as well. But then God's right there where he's like, this is where you need to be at all times. And if we can get more people to understand that realignment, I think...
That's the humbling part, though, right? What it takes, though, to even be willing to yield to the Lord is a humility. That we do have a lifespan here of 120 max, and most of us 80.
Yeah.
Right? It's really mind-blowing to think that of all the generations that have come before us, that somehow our 80 years of being here is so right or is so
important.
Important that we wouldn't defer to the God of the universe who is without beginning and without end. Like, how do you not?
I think you nailed it right there. Absolutely. How do you not?
Yeah.
You're right, to think of all the people that have come before us that are trying their hardest to impart that wisdom. Mm-hmm. But so many of us choose the echo chambers. We choose the people that don't have our best interests at heart, because the message comes across a little softer. It tastes a little sweeter. You know, the initial burst of it energizes you versus convicts you. Mm-hmm. We tend to run to those things versus saying, let me see which one is right. Mm-hmm. Let me take the time and invest the energy in figuring out the right thing versus everything else. Mm-hmm.